session on location-targeted advertising for brands. I'm Mike Boland. I'm Chief Analyst with BI Kelsey. Go ahead, Rick. So our goal over the next half an hour or so is to talk about the evolving art of location-targeted mobile marketing for brands specifically. Now, traditionally, the notion of location targeting, the connotation people usually have is where an ad shows up. So is it geo-targeted? We heard from John Costello earlier say that location isn't just about geography, it's about people. And that's an important notion because we're seeing data sets and all of the signals from the mobile device really start to paint a picture that let us do things like audience targeting. XAD is actually leading that, and we're going to get into that. There's also the concept of using all of these signals to get a clearer picture of attribution. So where are conversions happening? How is that tied back to campaign elements? And that has a few different levels to it, such as getting a clearer picture of return on ad spend, but also using the insights from that data to iterate and optimize campaigns on an ongoing basis, depending on what's working. And we're reaching all new levels of precision and granularity too. It's not just city level and even neighborhood level. We're talking about down to the meter level and even going beyond the threshold of the storefront. And we're talking about interiors, building interiors with things like beacons and what I like to call the last mile to the cash register, and also things like indoor mapping. So we have a great panel that's really attacking this from all different angles. So why don't I have each of you guys to start off, introduce yourselves, a little bit about yourself and your company, and then we'll dig in deeper from there. So David, why don't you start?
Thanks, Mike. I'm David Kaplan with geomarketing.com, a news site owned by Yext that covers the world of online to offline marketing. Basically, how does location factor into, is this thing on? Yeah.
There you go.
That was just practice. I'm David Kaplan,
over.
in case you didn't hear, sorry for the front row. Managing editor of geomarketing.com, a news site covering online to offline marketing and looking at how location factors into advertising and marketing and the connection between national brands and consumers down to the local level.
How's this? On?
This is Dan Haidt, by the way, from XAD. No.
Dan Haidt, head of platform for XAD, working with all of our channel partners. We are a mobile location platform, global, 10 countries around the world.
I heard.
Nathan, 50-50 shot that you get volume here.
Hello.
Now you can hear
There
it.
you go.
I'm Nathan Pettyjohn. I'm the CEO of Aisle 411. And by show of hands, how many of you have been frustrated while navigating a retail store trying to find a product, unable to do it? There's two people in the back that didn't raise their hand, but I don't believe them. We've all been in that situation. So what Aisle 411 does is we're kind of like the Google Maps or the MapQuest for inside retail stores. We allow you to search and map products down to the shelf they're located on. We're in about 14,000 retail stores. We have about 2 million products that we've mapped. And it provides value to not only the shopper, but the retailers and brands get a lot of interesting insights into why a shopper's in their store, what they're ready to purchase, and then we layer location technology onto that as well. So we'll get into that more in a bit.
Thank you, Nathan. Go ahead, Alex.
My name is Alex Nosifera. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Local ID. And what we're out to solve is for large multi-unit systems, becoming a platform to manage marketing relationships at scale, local marketing relationships at scale. So the name of the company is about identity. And every location, every storefront that's operated has a unique identity based on the people, the places, and the events going on there. And so we've taken this amalgamation of data that says, look, here are the weather patterns, here are the marathons, here are the events. What can I have our local marketing ambassadors do that's relevant to those communities? What could I have as an ad copy placed in a market that's being experienced by poor weather? Just taking identity, contextual elements, and being able to do this at scale is a really sort of disparate, decentralized problem for these large chains.
So thanks, guys. Those are all good kind of product descriptions. Now I want to drill down a little bit more and get some color on each of your business models, because I think that will provide some front-end definition that could frame all of the comments you'll make throughout the next 20 minutes or so. So for example, you're all working with different versions of retailers and publishers and advertisers. Who are your constituents, and whom do you serve, and who pays you, I guess, is the real question. David, I guess your constituents are your readers, right?
That's right. So,
Yeah.
right now, XAD is paying us. They're
Yep.
an advertiser, but
Yeah.
we're owned by Yext, which is in the digital presence and location management business. I believe YP talked about the idea before of managing multi-location content. That's largely what Yext does. It verifies that your vital location information is correct, and now they've gone into sort of expanded that idea with products like Zone, which is in the beacon space.
Mm-hmm. Dan, people have known you as an ad network, and that means you're working with all sides of the equation, but you're more of an ad network on steroids with a lot of ad tech too. So what's the model?
So our model is media, and we work with big brands. We work with their agencies. We work with brands direct. We work with channel partners, so a lot of traditional media companies that have large local sales organizations that are selling to kind of the mid-market aspect of things, but all location-based ads, as well as the long tail. So we still work with a lot of marketing automation companies. A lot of the directory space has still been selling to SMBs for a long period of time. A lot of our business is done programmatically now. That's just a way of buying, but connecting the pipes to allow people to buy more efficiently is really our focus.
Nathan, retailers, brands?
Yeah, so right now, primarily the retailers are paying us a service fee to optimize their enterprise data so that shoppers and associates can interact with it. And that's typically a monthly service for our licensing our software and for us optimizing all the data. Where it's going in the future, though, is by adding really precise indoor location, which we're now able to do at 30 centimeters of accuracy, and I'll explain a little bit more detail about that. It provides some really rich analytics for the retailers and the brands to understand dwell patterns in the aisle, what brands they were actually looking at in the aisle, and then tie that to point of sale and marketing data for a closed loop picture of how that shopper is buying.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. Not only the marketing angle, but things like planning out store aisles and just at an operational level, all kinds of inventory management, cool stuff that we're going to get into. Alex, the business model question.
So we go direct to large enterprise multi-unit systems. We tend to target ones that have over 100 units because they tend to have more of the problem of decentralization and sort of disparate.
Yeah, and one of the problems you're solving is, I don't know, that decentralization that causes some communication breakdowns in those large organizations. I want to come back to that, but another kind of question for all of you guys is that, we heard some data earlier. BI/Kelsey pegs the national to local advertising spend at $60 billion. And as an analyst looking at this space for the last 10 years or so, Dan, you and I have been talking about this for so long, just the merits of location. I'm seeing the temperature level rise and the excitement level rise in terms of adoption among the brands to do more location relevant content marketing and all of these things we're going to talk about. I guess from an anecdotal perspective, what are you each seeing? Are you seeing that temperature level rise? Are there any examples of brands you're working with that are recent converts to the church of local? Kind of what are you guys seeing out there in terms of adoption?
Yeah, from our perspective, it's absolutely true. I mean, still we can talk about all the tech in the world, but 90% of commerce still takes place in the physical world.
Yep.
So we don't try and boil the ocean, but there's a lot of verticals that make sense that will live in for the foreseeable future in the physical world. I don't see hamburgers being droned to us anytime soon, even though we might have a pair of shoes droned to us potentially. But the restaurant industry in particular has been one that's been moving very fast in the location space. They have obviously a lot of locations. It is something that is global in nature. Retail obviously is a big one, and cars, for all that we talk about, that they're very digitally savvy. You still have to go to a dealership ultimately to get your car. So the ultimate purchase of a car still takes place in the physical world. So we're seeing a very large movement of national brands moving in the local space. A lot of complexity around it. There's not trivial things that need to be solved. Everything from the creative to the media execution, billing when you get to franchise organizations and co-op organizations. There's a lot of things that need to be solved to really unlock the true potential of some of the spend that's out there, but we're seeing a lot happen from a national perspective.
Nathan, what about retailers and their kind of level of adoption?
So when we got started in 2008, we were definitely ahead of the curve. And every retailer we talked with said, we love this, but we're not ready yet. And they had to do things like add a shopping list to their mobile app and add their existing weekly ads to their mobile app. That's all happened for the majority of big retail now. So it really is starting to accelerate. And when you're able to add in the location technology, it gets really interesting. So we're seeing a lot of retailers and brands that are wanting access to this intelligence in the store. We talk a lot about creating the internet of stores so that we're creating the same level of sophistication that retailers are accustomed to on their e-commerce website, only for the physical retail environment.
And Alex, you're doing lots of work with, as you mentioned, 100 or plus type locations. I think you're doing some restaurant work, either altogether on a vertical breakdown. That same question of, the level of adoption, is that going up?
Absolutely. So what we found is that, I'd put it analogous to 10 years ago when you first start, you were able to socialize with your friends via a big group email, a group text, and then all of a sudden when you reconnected on Facebook with grade school students and high school students and all those, colleagues, you needed a social network to do that scale. And so when you operate over 100 units, it's sort of as those disparate children you have, you need a platform to look at that. So the reason we're seeing such appetite from larger systems is that they've got a lot of children to look after, scattered through lots of markets, and the sort of philosophical position of taking a platform to see things agnostically, what ads you're running in different markets, what creative's working in one market and not the other, what your boots on the ground are doing from a regional marketing perspective. Just, we're taking the Switzerland approach of saying, hey, come in and see what everything's going on, what behavioral patterns are going on, and just taking a real neutral approach. And the larger systems seem to have that appetite, and we're seeing that.
Sure, and within that kind of adoption cycle, what are you all seeing about the actual evolution of the analytics or the KPIs? I think usually with emerging media, and mobile's no longer emerging, it's certainly here, but we tend to see sort of a habit creep of the previous media define what the metrics and the KPIs are. I think we rely way too much on things like clicks and impressions, for example. What are you guys seeing with respect to the KPI, what you're measuring, what brands are asking for, and what they should be asking for? And David, you can jump in on this one too, because you missed the last round.
Yeah, no, well, I'm, talking in terms of KPIs, for the longest time there was this sense of, as you said, the click-through. That's because we're all focused on digital, or at least digital companies are just focused on digital. And now with the rise of the recognition that digital and physical are together, that people are carrying their mobile phones and not just a mobile user. So now the idea of, and I think XAD has done a lot with this in terms of looking at things like store visitation as the point, because the idea of someone clicking an ad, that's kind of great for the vendor, but the marketer is sort of well, that's not just what I wanted. I really wanted someone to actually go into my store and then buy something, and that's kind of the idea of attribution has become sort of the big topic for pretty much everyone we cover, whether it is the vendors who are providing the technology down to the marketers who want the specific, did this work or not just whether someone saw the ad or it was viewable, but did someone come in, buy something because of this ad.
We see things like the place visit rates and foot traffic rates and things like that. And I think one theme we've heard echoed today is that with a lot of mobile interaction, the buying cycle is somewhat compressed. So it's become both a branding and a direct response. Well, all of the above, as you guys are doing, Dan. So I guess that transitions to you. And that same kind of question, the KPI question.
Yeah, I mean, click-through rate it's a bullshit metric. There's lots of ways to influence click-through rate. I think a lot of the agencies, traditionally, that's what they looked at. They knew the digital space. That then translated in their mobile strategy. We just optimized then to a mobile page. Click-through rate was going to be the metric that they were going to look at. And the marketers are actually ahead of the agencies, even in this aspect of it's taking place in the real world. How do you help get people to my store? How are we going to measure that? In China, for instance, they don't even care that you get somebody to my store. Did somebody actually buy something? There's a lot of issues with being able to do that here in the U.S., at least at scale. But in China, you can actually do that very easily. Alipay and WeChat are probably 80% of the mobile payments that happen in China, so you can actually measure that. So the brands are actually moving very far ahead of where I think their agencies actually are of measuring that. And then at the SMB level, you know, I would say that the SMBs don't necessarily understand how to measure. So they look at things like click-through rate, they look at things like phone calls, things like map and driving directions, things like store visits, so a multitude of different ways to interact.
Most tweetable comment of the day so far about the
I'll give you one.
Nathan, you know, metrics and KPIs, you mentioned this before, the types of data you're feeding back to retailers. What are they asking for, and what should they be asking for?
Well, in its simplest format, they're looking for increased store visits and increased basket lift. It's what every retailer's after. So they're looking at how do I engage the shopper in the store. I think we've probably all heard it, but a more engaged shopper on mobile in the store will buy more. And so how do I provide better service for them? They're also looking at productivity metrics for their associates, and how can, you know, when they get an online order and for in-store pickup, I translate that times 1,000 a day across a national basis. If I can cut 2 minutes off of that order picking time in the store, that's real money.
Yeah.
So they're looking at those kinds of productivity enhancements. And then as we move forward, they're starting to look at how do the analytics help them better merchandise the store that will add sales lift, and then how do they use it for remarketing purposes. So if I see that you came in the store, you dwelled in front of a particular set of items, but you didn't buy, can I send you an email message 2 days from now and get you to come back in and buy it, or can you buy online?
And Alex, you guys are measuring a lot of stuff, so it's not even almost what you're feeding to you know, your direct relationships and brands and multi-location businesses, but almost the additional layer of the pattern recognition that you're detecting and the insights you're pulling out of all that data. So what are some of the valuable things you're passing along to them that are actionable?
Well, I mean, you know, 90% of commerce, brick and mortar, and you just look at the circular environment around it, it's an incredibly complex formula. You've got, you know, you walk outside this building, there are thousands of options for us to go eat at, drink at, smoke at, whatever we want to do. And what Local ID does is it takes everything going on in an area. So again, if there's the St. Patty's Day parade, if you're a large system and you look back 2 months and you see a spike of 3% in traffic or sales or certain SKUs were going off the shelf, for the most part, you have no idea. You have no idea why. You're not able, because your systems are so disparate and decentralized. So what we're trying to do is bring all these pieces to the party, and you can do a look back and say, look, we got 3 inches of rain that day. That had an impact on Y. Or we ran a campaign with XAD and promoted these products. You're able to start to understand the influences that you had, including what your local marketing organization does. So for all of these big systems, they have local marketing ambassadors. Their titles are regional marketers or field marketers or local marketers. And they're out doing local sponsorships. They're working with the YMCA. They're working with schools. They're fundraisers. And they'll go do a sponsorship. They'll do a sample tent. That had an influence on bringing people to the store. So there's all these contributing factors that just we felt needed to kind of be put in one sink to take a crack at drawing lines of correlations and patterns. And that's why we just believe in this sort of agnostic position to let the geniuses have the plumbing, but we just wanted to bring all the plumbing into one place.
So before we move on from the topic of analytics, Nathan, now might be a good time to show that video that really shows what you can see from the vantage point of a retailer. And so can we launch that video? Marcus, right?
All right, here it is. So actually, can we stop it for just a second? I'm going to be asking to stop a couple of times here and explain a few things. So Aisle 411 announced a partnership last week with Philips Lighting. So you've heard me talk about 30-centimeter accuracy of indoor positioning. I never would have thought this even a year ago, but we're doing it with LED lights, with visible light communication. And it interacts with the camera on a mobile device and can triangulate the positioning and essentially the orientation of the device within 30 centimeters of accuracy. So last week we were in Frankfurt at the biggest lighting show in the world. Never thought I would be there, but I was there, and we actually had, this is like a mock retail store setup that we had in the Philips booth. So what it's going to show is If we play it here just a little bit, you'll see on the right side what the actual shopper's seeing, and we stop there. They walk in front of the Merlot, and they get a recommendation for Merlot and then some other products that would go nicely with that. In real time on the left, we're tracking with a heat map where the shopper is. As they walk around the corner here, literally that precision, they walk in front of Crackers, we can trigger a message to them on a special offer. As we move back into this.
Is red a higher dwell time?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. And so as they walk just right around the aisle on the end cap there, you'll basically get another triggered message. And it's an example of how you could trigger a survey. And then finally, you're going to start to see some analytics. So if we stop right here, you're able to look at like dwell patterns in different zones, which are literally sections of aisle. On the top right, you see blue. We did like a couple of customer segmentations, so we had blue and red, so you could see what different types of shoppers were there. Their total dwell time. And then if we play just a little bit of the rest of this here, what's interesting is you start to be able to see not only like traffic patterns through the store, but if you recommend things to the shopper in the store, you'll see some analytics come up on like what offers they were recommended, which ones they accepted by different categories and by different shopper segmentation. So with this, I like to think of every shelf being the equivalency of a URL. And if we can take that approach, the store starts to get really, really interesting.
That's great. And what are the use cases? This is very clear here, but what are the types of retailers you work with that you feel like it shines most or that it's most conducive? I would imagine places that have lots of SKUs or places that are kind of cavernous like a Home Depot. Where does it work best?
Sure. Well, from a shopper's perspective, obviously the bigger the store and the less amount of times you frequent the store, the navigation provides more value. But more of the passive type of analytics are valuable in virtually every setting, especially with this precision. One of the questions we had up front, though, is like, well, a shopper doesn't always have their mobile device out. The camera is not always in front of the lights. So what the lighting companies are doing now is they're actually putting Bluetooth low-energy beacons in the light fixtures themselves, which is really interesting because you've now got this smart grid that can get a device out of your pocket, trigger a message to you, and then once that device is out, then we can really get hyper-local. But to finish on that, one of the really interesting areas is grocery, because we're seeing millions of shoppers are using digital shopping lists in the store, so they have their device out constantly in the store, plus they're frequenting, so you can start to get really interesting data points.
So I think that means we've gotten to the beacon section of our discussion. I want David, you to jump
Finally,
in.
beacons.
Our resident
I know,
beacon expert. But before we get there, I want to ask you a quick question, Dan, because something that Nathan said is very interesting, treating each shelf kind of like a URL. That reminds me of what you guys just announced in Barcelona, where you're essentially bringing search-like bidding, search-like kind of the currency of what people are buying to the real world, to real-world locations. And this builds from your Blueprints product. And it comes with the notion that we've always been told that search is a great indicator of a buying persona or intent, but something that's even stronger of an indicator is where you actually go in the real world. So talk about that marketplace product.
Yeah, we actually have talked about it, that you're doing your intent. You know, where you are, where you've been, you're actually doing what you actually are intending to do, not trying to interpret what you might be wanting
Search
to
as a
do.
proxy for intent, where you're talking about the real thing.
Yeah, so we think that where you are, where you've been, is a better indication of what you're likely to do than what you search for or what you like in social. And what we launched in Barcelona is a self-serve platform that you can buy locations in real time and create it into a bidded marketplace. Somebody who's in a coffee shop has a different value at that point in time versus somebody who's on an auto lot. But somebody who's in a coffee shop that's been to an auto lot might have a different valuation than somebody, say, who's been in an auto lot but hasn't been in a coffee shop. So those types of parameters that you start looking at of reaching somebody in that moment based on where they've been and creating an ecosystem that becomes a bidded marketplace, very conducive to search. By keywords, you buy locations. Yeah. And the more granular you want to do, the higher density of bids, the higher the CPM will be.
So let's move on to beacons. David,
Yes.
So I want to get your overall thought of beacons. There's so much talk of beacons. I have some kind of cautious optimism about the adoption rates that have been kind of metered to some degree by some of the opt-in friction at the settings layer, but that gets a little more technical. Let's start with your kind of overall take on beacons, where we are in the adoption cycle and the opportunities, and then we'll drill down into some very interesting kind of things you've written recently about the whole kind of beacon opportunity. So go ahead.
Well, I'm really excited about beacons. I think it's very easy to sort of be dismissive of them, and but also to recognize at the same time the limitations of the idea, as you said, the friction of to access a beacon. You're talking about someone who has to, one, have the store app, generally speaking. There may be some other cases. And then you have to have your Bluetooth on. And the idea of, okay, how many people here have their Bluetooth on at the moment? All right, well, they're all up here, and maybe one over here. So,
It's 100% more simple.
because you need an active reason to
Yeah.
do that. It's not,
You have
most
to push
people-
notifications on as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and even then, you sort of wonder, in terms of talking about KPIs with beacons, what's for a lot of retailers, why are we doing this? To send someone a discount message for the most part. But the idea of beacons, I think over the past 2 years has been expanding. I think the way that Nathan just described in terms of as a complement to LED lighting or other signals is kind of where they make sense. And from there, but on their own, the idea of using a beacon beyond just sort of, okay, here's 10% off as you happen to be walking by the
Right.
toothpaste aisle. The idea is, in terms of knowing whether it worked, beacons tend not to be able to access data. They're kind of a one-way,
Yep.
one-way messaging system. The idea is you have to get someone to engage with it. And when I talk to people about the metric of engagement, that's the metric for beacons, apparently. And even from there, okay, you've engaged with that means they just turned on their Bluetooth. Did they actually send a message to say or share information about what they're interested in? Maybe, maybe not. So that's where the kind of limitations are. And so, I mean, question for Nathan in terms of the experiment you just showed from Frankfurt. Was the idea of using beacons to complement, as you said, the idea that people aren't necessarily having their camera out facing the light where they can be recorded? What do beacons fill a hole, or is it just a second layer to provide other kinds of messaging?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a hybrid approach. It complements other location technologies. A couple of other use cases that I've heard from retailers that they're testing and using that are quite interesting is, let's take pet stores, for example, and someone comes in to pick up their pet from being groomed. And so as they're entering the store, they get a notification inside, hey, the owner is here for this dog, and they walk it out and have it ready. Other things, when you're in certain parts of the store, they can send associates over to be there knowing that there's more people there. So it's actually leveraging beacons to enhance the face-to-face customer experience, which is quite interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. So David, you've also written recently about kind of changing the rhetoric of beacons, right? Not just something to push messaging, to be more of a utility one, but also similar or very analogous to what Dan was talking about. We're a function of the places we go.
Yeah.
So using it to listen and as a tracking device, and then therefore a tool towards retargeting.
Yeah, and that's where it gets more interesting. But I think getting back to Nathan's point, in terms of a larger sense of where will beacons be used, I think they will be in this kind of almost mundane background. Here's where the store employees are. We know maybe there's some activity in the store. We can see by what Nathan showed where the heat map is. We should send more employees there. That's a kind of a really good use case of beacons, which is beyond advertising.
Yeah.
It's more of a sort of background marketing. But in terms of where it gets interesting where it meets the consumer is retargeting. It kind of fills that hole where someone goes into a store and we know they're in the store. Now what do we do? They've walked out, they didn't buy anything. We can tell that because we can match it with credit card information as well. But now the beacon kind of fills that hole to say, okay, we know they were there and they didn't buy anything. Now we can send them a message on Facebook, on their PC, and it does close that online to offline, digital to physical loop.
And if we know their dwell time, that's even more robust data to make those types of follow-up marketing decisions. So we're almost out of time here, but what I want to find out from each of you guys is, in all the things we're talking about, are there any common winning strategies that you've detected in all the work you're doing, or the companies you're observing in the brand world, in what they've done. If you can name names, that's great. Or if you don't want to answer that question, conversely, what are some common pitfalls in terms of just location targeting? Who's doing it right? Who's doing it wrong? What are the kind of final takeaways or prescriptive advice for this audience?
Well, I remember the big scare case was a few years ago. A major department store, may have been Nordstrom's.
May not.
Are there? May not have been. Sorry, Nordstrom.
Clever.
But yeah, don't sue me. A few years ago, they had really experimented with beacons when Apple iBeacon came out, and the idea was that, hey, people don't want this friction of turning on their Bluetooth or opening the app. We'll just kind of program the app to just open it for them and just get that information. And people, of course, naturally heard something about their information being taken from their phones without them agreeing to it. So there was a bit of a minor freak out from people who were paying attention to it. And there's always a lot of people, especially on social media, paying attention to those sort of things. And so, then it created this idea of, well, how much do people really want to be bothered, either by an in-store salesperson and now on their phone to sort of open that app. But the idea is that if you are transparent, you kind of have to. You don't really have, the choice is pretty simple. Transparency is the key to any dilemma, and you pretty much have to ask permission.
Yep.
And that's also kind of gives us the talk of personalization is a big thing at this conference and at other tech conferences. That sort of solves that. And once you've kind of maybe have nailed that, and maybe there'll be a point where beacons are maybe a bit less frictionless, and where you can maybe sign off and say, okay, Bluetooth is killing my battery, and there's some myths about that. Maybe it doesn't kill your battery. It does when I use my Apple Watch, though. I definitely have stopped that. But that's where the pitfalls are, just sort of not being upfront about what you're using. Another case I'll just get to quickly. Last year, Titan out of home company that you'll see them on phone kiosks, and now they're doing digital kiosks, had put beacons in a bunch of phone booths, and BuzzFeed ran this very inflammatory, scary article about they're collecting your data. And of course they weren't, but the idea was to sort of measure who was walking by. But again, they didn't sort of announce that they were doing this at phone booths, and so there was a freak out. So that's the pitfall.
The transparency, respect user privacy, and the universal don't be creepy law.
That's simple, right?
Yeah. Dan.
So we see that the brands that are using location as a category of buying and not just a tactic of buying are the ones that are being very successful in this. We have a lot of brands we're working with directly, not to necessarily usurp the agencies, but the brands that have physical locations, understand that their world takes place in the physical world, are the ones that are finding more success. Ones that are just relying on agencies to bring them everything and not necessarily getting into the game are the ones that are lagging behind.
Nice. Well said. Nathan?
I would say, all-encompassing, I would encourage people to take a very big, comprehensive look at all these technologies and pull them together. That's when you get the, oh my God scenario, like this data looks really interesting. If you just do like product search mapping in a store, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Yeah. If you just add a loyalty program, kind of interesting. If you just have mobile offers in your mobile app, that's kind of interesting. When you start combining all that together, and you combine it with like XAD, like where were these people? What drove them into the store? Then where did they go? What offers did they accept? Did they go to the shelf? Then did they buy that? And that's when it gets like, wow.
And combining all that data is a great segue
Yeah.
to Alex. You guys are doing just that.
That's right.
You get the final word.
Well, I would say for us, it's right now targeting companies that literally, if someone at corporate has a local in their title, it's a good sign for us. Just means they're taking it seriously. They're trying to put some structure around disciplines and agility and all these things for local that was historically handled a lot by their agency, and it was being done in a very manual, non-programmatic way. So for us right now, we're still in this infancy element of the long ride here for branded local. But I would say we're finding brands that have a local in that corporate title are taking it very seriously and are investing in infrastructure and programmatic, disciplines and creative templates, et cetera.
So you're spending a lot of time on LinkedIn doing keyword searches?
We're stalking anyone with a local in their title with a brand that has over 100 stores.
Nice.
Yes.
So stalking is the winning strategy, is where we're going to end it.
Yes.
Please join me in thanking the panel.